up, everybody? This is Matt from Headwaters Adventure Company. I hope the sound's coming out good because it's going through the computer, not the camera this time. Had a little bit of technical difficulties. But I wanted to talk to you guys about the fishing meetup that we did this past weekend at Clearlake. It was awesome. We had just 5 guys out there, but more and more every time. Our next one's going to be at Almanor, so I hope you guys can make it out for that because with the weather going on like it is, I bet those smallmouth are going to be spawning and it's going to be a good time. Also, we had some people get out to Shasta, and those fish are finally moving up. But I'm going to talk about Clearlake first. So when we got to Clearlake, it was bed fishing. They were bedded everywhere, all over the place. You couldn't help but find them on beds. The cool thing was there was crappie beds everywhere too. So if you like crappie fishing, you like bass fishing on beds, now is a great time to get out to Clearlake. We caught a lot of nice fish. Like I said, there's 5 of us out there, and a couple of us knew how to bed fish, and a few of us were learning, which was a really cool experience because I kind of thought, and this is just in my mind, you see the fish, they're not moving away from you. It's pretty easy to catch them. But some of the guys struggled at first when doing this, just because there is a bit of a technique. There's a lot of people who throw baits in there and just shake them and wait for the fish to, move towards them, react to them. And that actually doesn't work the best. Best case or best thing that you can do is actually touch the fish with your lures. And that was something that the guys weren't doing at first, where you really want to aggravate these fish. The fish are eating out of protection and aggression, not out of a feeding habit. So when they're on the beds, they do not eat. The only reason that they're going to eat something is to remove a threat from their eggs. So when they put something in their mouth, it's either to kill it or remove it from the bed, because a lot of times they will pick up an end of something, move it over, 3 to 5 feet out of the bed, drop it, and swim back to the bed. So it's not about a feeding response. It's about aggression, annoyance, and protection. So what I did, what I was doing a lot of the time was going back and forth between some mid-sized baits. I was throwing the rage bugs. Sorry, I forget this is the computer, not the camera, but the rage bugs, it's got a lot of movement to it, but it's also a beaver style bait, so you've got the action and the profile of something slightly larger. The other thing that I throw a lot of is the brush hogs, and I would tip the ends of these green to look more like a bluegill. Both of these, I'd say again, are mid-sized bait. They're still a soft plastic, still really easy for them to inhale. I was doing it with a 4 and a 5/0 hook, and your weight, our fish were at a max of 10 feet or so, and as shallow as 2 feet. So I would do a 3/16 to a 5/16 ounce weight. And depending on the cover you're in, you could do 6-pound test, probably not with these, up to 20-pound test, depending on what you're throwing. I did get into a nice 7-pounder that was in some grass behind a log, and I was glad I was using a 20-pound test for that one, and I was able to drag her out of there. And I was doing that with a jig. So I was throwing a white swim jig on the beds, and the reason that I like white is, for one, you can keep a visual on it very, very well. A big part of sight fishing, obviously, is knowing where the fish are, knowing where your bait is. The white stands out, and oddly enough, a lot of times white isn't something. The brighter colors don't seem to aggravate them. Usually something more natural like a bluegill or a carp or a crawdad is something more threatening. But they were really, really not liking the white, which, when I say that, means they were very aggressive towards it. So after a while, I started throwing the white specifically because it seemed to rile them up quite a bit more. And obviously see it. The swim jig I did just because we were fishing some cover, and that more of a mango or bullet head design is going to come through the cover well. So when you have beds and tulies and things like that, a football style or a football head style jig is not going to be the best because it's not going to fit through the reeds very well. It's going to be wider. It's going to get stuck. If you do have some grass on it, it's harder to pop it through. So that swim jig design, even though you're only fishing a few feet in front of you, and the football head does work, but if you have wood, if you have trees, if you have everything else, especially where you might have to skip into that bed to get it to them, that swim jig is a great, great option. Again, one of my favorite baits just because it is so versatile. It's a crankbait, it's a spinner bait, it's vibrating jig, it's a swim jig, it's a jig. So you can do everything with it. I really, really enjoy them. The trailer I had on there was just a white crawdad style trailer. You could do it with any trailer. Usually with a swim jig, I'm doing a crawdad or I'm doing a swim bait. I mean, those are my two. They're going to have some sort of action. That was just a white trailer, so I could, again, keep a visual on it. So I went back and forth. The other thing for bed fishing too is don't throw the same bait at them over and over and over and over again if they're not eating it. Because even with the white jig, I had some fish that were very aggressive towards it, but they were only grabbing a claw or they were moving out of the bed. Some of them would even grab it by the skirt and move it. So if the whole bait's not going in their mouth, switch it up. Throw that brush hog. Throw something smaller. A couple of the other fish that I caught were on something like little swim baits. That's just a 3-incher, and it gets it too. And I did it in chartreuse again because we're bed fishing. It's something that I can see visually, and the fish, it's a smaller profile. So once you put something big in there, something small is really easy to grab, and they're going to fit the whole thing in their mouth 9 times out of 10. Also, this is a 3-inch Senko. I'll throw them as a Ned rig. Ned rig's also a great option. I caught fish on the Z-Man Ned rigs as well. A small 4-inch worm. This one's got a chartreuse tail, just something, again, that you can see. I was throwing stuff on a spinning rod, so I'd throw the bigger baits at them, and if they weren't eating that, I would grab the spinning rod with a 1/8 ball head and throw one of these on there, and again, they usually eat that pretty quick. Plus, it's the perfect size for crappie, and a lot of those crappie over there, I swear, are 16 inches. I'd say 14, 16, maybe even bigger than that. They're huge right now. There was lots and lots of fish cruising. There was even fish schooling with carp, and those fish really wouldn't react to anything. Occasionally, I'd get a follower on a small swim bait. I did pick up one, my smallest fish, on a small swim bait, just blindly casting. I also picked up one fish flipping a dock with a Senko. So the fish that weren't on beds were quite a bit harder to catch. I talked to David from Clearlake Outdoors, and he recommended throwing your big glide bait in that situation just because you get those fish's curiosity, and it's also a big meal. So that was something I didn't bring. I had my dog with me, so I was traveling pretty light, just 3 rods. Uh, we had James Robertson out there. He was putting a hurting on him. He was throwing a vibrating jig on the bed. So he was hopping it into the beds. So it made a lot of sound and a lot of disturbance, and it really aggravated those fish. He was also throwing a jig. Daryl was throwing a jig. Dennis, I believe, was throwing a jig as well. And then we had Hank out there, and he was brand new to bass fishing in general, which this was an entirely new way for him to fish. And I was glad that he was there and learned something, because when you see it click, when you're just like, these fish are here and I can't get them to bite. What's going on? And then you start realizing what's going on and why they're acting that way, and what you can do to make them bite, which one of the big things was just touching the fish with the bait. I always try to aim for the gill plate if I can, but letting the bait roll over their back, getting it in front of their face. If they're nose down on it, give it a little hop, pop them in the chin, just something to piss them off and really be in their area where they don't want you. So he caught his first few fish bed fishing, which I was very excited about. He got some 3 and 4 pounders. That's the thing with these fish over there too right now. Everything is 2.5 to 3 pounds. That is your standard male. So when you're fishing up here at Shasta and a lot of the other places up here where you're catching these 12-inch, 13-inch, 14-inch fish, these fish, like your small fish, are double the size of anything you're catching up here right now, generally. I did end up with a 5 and a 7 pounder. I know James got a 5 and lost a 6 at the boat. Like I said, everything else was like 2, 3, 4 pounds. I lost a couple in that 5, 6 pound range as well. It's fun fishing. And that was the first day that we were there on Saturday. It was hot. It was 95 degrees. The sun was blaring. You could see these fish really, really well. The second day, the wind kicked out and the temperature dropped, so you couldn't see the fish quite so well, especially where the waves were hitting the shore. It dirtied everything up, and we had a small window to catch a handful of bedfish, and then everything was mud brown, and we started just blind fishing. Or some of those beds that were in really, really shallow water, you can still see the silhouette of a bass, and you try. And we did catch a few fish doing that. But overall, it was a great meetup. I was glad to have those guys out there. It was a lot of fun. One of my favorite things to do is bed fishing. If you have any questions, I know there's a few people watching, but please feel free to ask questions. But yeah, our next meetup is going to be at Lake Almanor, which is a smallmouth bass fishery. I'm actually not sure if there is largemouth in there. There's also a bunch of trout and big brown trout at that. So that's going to be a fun meetup. That one's going to be towards the end. I believe it is the 28th of this month. So feel free to meet us out there. All that information is going to be on our website under the calendar. So if you want to meet up and meet us out there for that, that would be awesome. I believe we're also going to be having some Old Town kayak crates, fishing crates. So that's going to be a part of our giveaway for that one. So come on and yeah, catch a few fish. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that the smallmouth are going to be spawning up there, because smallmouth bed fishing is even more fun because those fish are way more aggressive, and it's going to be a good time. We had a bunch of people go out, or not a bunch, we had some people go out to Lake Shasta as well. And they put a hurting on them, like 30, 40, 50 fish days on Saturday and Sunday. They were fishing shallow. The fish are moving up. They're in that, I would say, 0 to 10 foot range right now, and they were catching them all on little swim baits. Not these ones per se, but your 2.8s, your 3-inch, your 3.3s, I would say up to a 4-inch was getting bit. And it was just, your standard cast and retrieve. A few of them were caught on shad-colored swim jigs, but it seems like they're definitely chasing bait and they're moving up. Those fish don't seem to be spawning quite yet. I'm sure there's a few here and there in different coves and in different places, but with the cool down that we're going to be having this week, where we have 65-degree weather throughout, it's going to, again, I wouldn't say put them off, but it's going to stop the staging just a little bit. They're going to still feed, but they're not going to move up and start getting on those beds yet. The ones that are there are not going to move up unless we get some drastic cold front. But as long as we're in the 60s and have some sunshine, the fish on the beds aren't going to leave them. So the few that are there will stay, and the ones that are moving up are just going to wait a little bit longer. We're going to get into warm weather again in not so long. But yeah, swim baits up at Shasta right now. Bed fishing, you could do it. I was throwing 6-pound test on my smaller stuff like this. If you could get away with it, if there's not a lot of cover, go small. Go with small, sharp hooks. You're going to lose a lot less fish. You just have to play them a little bit more. If you're around cover, or if you just like jigs and things like that, like I said, I like the heavy line, 17, 18, 20-pound test. This is the 7.6 heavy from iRod. I really, really like it because I can swing hard and it's parabolic. And I got that with a Daiwa reel. I'm a big fan of the Daiwas. My other rod that I was throwing the Texas rigs on is a little bit lighter just because you don't have that weed guard. Small weight, 4-aught or a 5-aught hook. You could even do a 3. It really depends on the size of your bait. But that's on the 7.4 heavy from iRod. Same thing, a little bit shorter handle, but still an awesome, awesome rod. I'm a big fan of them. I've been throwing them for the last year and a half or so. For the price, one of my favorite rods by far. This is also what I would throw my jigs on at Shasta if you don't have quite so much cover, or if you're not expecting quite as large a fish. At Clearlake, especially when you could see how big the fish is, I'm going to go with my heavier line, heavier rod, jack them, and drag them to the boat. The less time that you're playing those fish in close combat, when you have all of the trees and the tules and everything else around, better to get them in quick so they don't wrap you up. Because we had a few fish, there's trees everywhere. They want to get you in that, and you don't want them to be in there. So that's about all I've got. I'm sorry I don't have water temperatures. I didn't bring a fish finder out to Clearlake. And then over at Shasta, my buddies, I don't believe, had a fish finder on their boat. But everywhere is gorgeous right now. Clearlake's usually a place that I don't think is aesthetically pleasing. It's just kind of a scummier lake. The last few years especially, just because it's been so hot and we haven't had the water. With the water that we've got right now, it was gorgeous over there. Everything's luscious and green. We were kind of wading in the water. I was catching some fish just from shore after we pulled the kayaks in too. Beautiful place right now. So is Shasta. Definitely get out. Trinity's fishing extremely well. I had one buddy go up there this past weekend, and he was getting them on underspins and swim baits. So underspins on something smaller, and then larger swim baits as well. I know he was talking about 30 fish days out there, and that's a nice mix of largemouth and smallmouth, and he had quite a few in that 5-pound range. So that's a place to go check out now too. Those fish seem to like the cooler water and the cooler weather a little bit better than some of our other places, like I would say Clearlake. I think it's going to get tougher with this little cooler front moving in. Up there, I don't think the fish care. If you've got a chance to get out there, they're still in pre-spawn up there. This is a chance to put up numbers and size. If you could get out there, go out there. It is a good time out there. Definitely using more bait fish patterns. Don't be afraid to throw a jig. I mean, that's what I like to do. It would be more of your browns and blacks, especially depending on if it's overcast or sunny out. Browns, obviously sunny. Everywhere, all over the world, they eat a brown jig. If it's overcast out, a black and blue is a great option. And again, swim baits, fish. They eat a lot of fish in Trinity. They're eating a lot of fish at Shasta. Obviously, smaller ones because their forage is going to be different. And over at Clearlake right now, the hitch population is awesome. They're making a big comeback. I didn't see shad. There was a bunch of pond smelt, and there was, I don't know what they were, itty bitty things, a couple of centimeters maybe. There's bluegill, there's baby bass, there's Sacramento blackfish. I couldn't tell if they were pike minnow or hardhead, but there were those. There was carp everywhere. If you're a fan of bow fishing, go over to Clearlake right now. You will shoot a lot of carp. Not something that I've tried, but it sounded like fun with how many we were seeing. So that's about all I got for you. If nobody's got any questions, I've talked enough about this. It was a good time. Hopefully I'll see you guys at the next one for more bed fishing, more smallmouth, and we will see you then. So until next time, stay fishy, my